Good morning, and welcome to this Easter celebration of the Gay Street United Methodist Church. We are here in the chapel today to celebrate the fact that He is risen indeed, and so I welcome you. I'll be sharing with you the scriptures for today and a sermon. I hope that you will be watching this on our website. Also look at the recording of the virtual choir that was created by the United Methodist Discipleship Ministries. That is a worldwide choir allowing us to sing together, Christ the Lord is risen today. And to celebrate in any way that you can, telling the story of the resurrection and the good news of life everlasting. We're so glad to be together today and to be celebrating Easter in the midst of this incredible year that asks us to look for God. I'm going to start by sharing our scriptures that we have for us today. I'm going first the lesson from Acts, and this is a story about Peter. This is from Acts chapter 10, beginning with verse 34. Peter said, "I really am learning that God doesn't show partiality to one group of people over another. Rather, in every nation, whoever worships him and does what is right is acceptable to him. This is the message of peace he sent to the Israelites by proclaiming the good news through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all. You know what happened throughout Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism John preached. You know about Jesus of Nazareth, whom God anointed with the Holy Spirit and endowed with power. Jesus traveled around doing good and healing everyone oppressed by the devil because God was with him. We are witnesses of everything he did, both in Judea and in Jerusalem. They killed him by hanging him on a tree, but God raised him up on the third day and allowed him to be seen, not by everyone, but by us. We are witnesses whom God chose beforehand, who ate and drank with him after God raised him from the dead. He commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he is the one whom God appointed as judge of the living and the dead. All the prophets testify about him, that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name." May God add blessing to the reading of these words. And then from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, beginning with verse 1. Early in the morning on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. She ran to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord from the tomb and we don't know where they've put him." Peter and the other disciple left to go to the tomb. They were running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter and was the first to arrive at the tomb. Bending down to take a look, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he didn't go in. Following him, Simon Peter entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there. He also saw the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head. It wasn't with the other cloths, but was folded up in its own place. Then the other disciple, the one who arrived at the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They didn't yet understand the scriptures that Jesus must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to the place where they were staying. Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she cried, she bent down to look into the tomb. She saw two angels dressed in white seated where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the foot. The angels asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She replied, "They have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him." As soon as she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she replied, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Don't hold on to me, for I haven't yet gone up to my Father. Go to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I'm going up to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene left and announced to the disciples, "I've seen the Lord." Then she told them what he said to her. This is the word from the Lord. Thanks be to God. On the first day of my Western Civilization, Western Civ history class when I was in college, our professor, Erica Wood, had just begun to talk about what we were going to do that term in that class when there was a knock on the door and another one of the history professors came into the room. He was holding this big stack of papers and he was clearly angry. He started shouting at our professor, who just stood there and getting all red in the face, and he shouted at her for a while, then he threw down the sheaf of papers and he stormed out of the room. Now, all of us as students, we just kind of sat there shocked and frozen in place. We didn't know where to look. We didn't know what to say or to do. Professor Wood, she kind of walked over casually. She started picking up the papers off the floor. She went back to the front of the room and she looked at us and she said, "What did you see?" You see, this was her way, a little shocking, of course. This was her way of introducing to us the study of history. She said, you know, history is written by human beings. All these different people are going to have seen and experienced different things in these historical events. And various people are going to write about them from their own perspective and their unique experience. It would be important for us as students of history to bear all of that in mind, to think who is writing this, when are they writing this, to look for as many different kinds of experiences as possible, to look for primary sources, you know, things that were written on the spot, so that we could get to the truth of the story of history and have more of the whole story. Now, this is true of crime and law enforcement stuff as well. Of course, if you read mystery stories or you follow true crime stories, you want as many witnesses as possible because each person will have seen an event in their own unique way and notice particular things. When my husband Chris was first a prosecutor, he would ride sometimes with the state troopers or the police in their cars, and he was amazed. He came over and he told me, he was amazed. He goes, you know, like this car goes by really fast and they can read the license plate number as it goes by, because of course that's what they're trained to do and what they're looking for in that. He didn't notice those. He said it's amazing how much they would notice in a very quick moment when they would look at a car, and it's because that was their experience. In a trial, you want different kinds of witnesses: eyewitnesses, law enforcement witnesses, expert witnesses, and as much evidence as possible. On this Easter Sunday morning, in the midst of this fear and anxiety and struggle that we're having right now, I remind you that you are witnesses in this unique historical time period. We are going to be testifying, as always we testify, but we're going to have a unique experience to testify to what it was like to have Easter this year in this great trial that is ongoing between good and bad and fear and hope and love and hate and life and death. And what we testify to, as always, is a God of good and hope and love and life. What do you see right now? What have you learned? What are we learning right now? And what do you believe? What are we going to testify to? How does this show in the way you live, by the way? Our very lives are evidence of the good news that we believe and we proclaim. That Jesus was crucified, dead, and buried, that he rose on the third day, that he ascended into heaven, and that's why we believe in the Holy Universal Church, in the communion of saints, in the forgiveness of sins, and the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. And here's why the resurrection story from John, the empty tomb story from John, is so helpful to us today as we think about how we're witnesses. You know, we get kind of dismayed by that idea that I'm a witness. I can't do that. But this is a story of three different people who go to the empty tomb and have three really different experiences at the empty tomb. And it's such a reassurance to say, you know, each person that's going to experience this differently and have something separate to testify to. And each one is going to live out their life in a unique way. Nobody's saying that to be a witness, you have to be like anyone else, even anyone in the Bible. We all do not have to be preachers or teachers or healers or leaders or monks or missionaries or midwives or apostles or whatever. We simply have to pay attention to what God is doing in the world and live our lives in joy and response to that. So let's talk about the three people who come to the empty tomb in this account from John. The first is Mary Magdalene. And I always have to start with kind of a defense of Mary Magdalene, I guess it is, that Christian tradition has identified Mary Magdalene as a prostitute, which is, there's no evidence for that in the writing of the Bible. That's kind of mixing her up with the story of the woman from the city who cries on Jesus's feet. All it says, though, in the gospel accounts is that Jesus healed her of 7 demons. And the other thing it says to her is that there she is at various different events and following Jesus. She's a disciple. That's the most important thing to know about Mary Magdalene. But we can tell a lot from her experience here at the empty tomb. She comes first and alone to the empty tomb. And the evidence that she sees and what she witnesses first and reacts to is simply the stone rolled away. And she reacts to that right away with panic and fear and grief. They've taken him away. They've taken him away, and I don't know where he is. And she right away has this emotional response to it. You can understand this. We don't even know who the they is that she's referring to. It could be the Romans or the soldiers that she's thinking of. It could be the Jewish authorities. It could even be other friends of Jesus. She doesn't know. She just knows that there's something has happened here. And what she wanted to do to mourn Jesus and to say goodbye to him, she's not able to do. And she reacts to that because of this loving personal relationship that she has with Jesus. Isn't this what people are experiencing right now? They cannot be with their loved ones when they're dying. And that when somebody does die, no matter of what, in these days, we can't have a funeral and gather together to mourn them. She hasn't had a chance to say goodbye to Jesus, to mourn. And her grief and her rage of the last few days just explode at this moment. And she runs back and tells these other two disciples, they've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've put him. And she goes back with them, but stays outside the tomb crying. Stays outside the tomb weeping. And even after they've gone, she's there and she looks and she sees indeed the thing that she has dreaded the most. He's not there. He's not there. But she does see 2 angels. And the angels ask her, woman, why are you crying? And again, she says to them, because they've taken away. This is it. Her experience is this grief and the loss of what she thinks of as the permanent loss of Jesus and not getting to say goodbye to him. And they say he's not here, he's risen. And she turns and there is someone else there who says, woman, why are you crying? And asks her again, and asks her, who are you looking for? Allows her to say it again, they've taken my Lord. And and to say, are you the one who took him? She thinks he's the gardener. Tell me where he is so that I can get him. And he simply says to her, Mary. This is evidence to her. This one whom she loves and knows her personally. Mary. And she calls him what she has been calling him, teacher. And she obviously wants to grab onto him, and he says, nope, not yet, because I still have to go up to the Father, which will complete the story. He's come from the Father, he's crucified, he is risen, and he will ascend, because that will complete the journey that will bring us along with him, the bridge between earth and heaven, so that now we will have the same personal relationship with God that Jesus has had. And this is the message that Mary gets. And she's the unique witness to this personal relationship. I am going up to my Father and your Father, my God and your God. Go tell the brothers and the sisters, our family, because this is the forever message. And that's what she will carry away as a witness and how she will live her life. The next disciple to come to the tomb is only identified as the disciple whom Jesus loved, the beloved disciple, we call him sometimes. He's not named, but he's referred to several times in the Gospel of John and shows up, in important places at the Last Supper, at the foot of the cross, with Jesus asking him to take care of his mother, Mary. And this disciple, we sometimes think of as either calling him John or at least knowing that he is the one whose witness in a community after Jesus' resurrection creates this gospel. It is his witness That becomes the writing of the Gospel of John and the letters of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And you can see his experience. His experience is in a community. He stresses over and over again that you see and you believe. And we love one another as God has loved us. And we live in this beloved community. And this is what our lives are about. That's throughout the Gospel of John and those letters of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And this disciple gets there first, again, because of his love also of Jesus. And he looks and sees and goes in after Peter, and he sees the grave clothes. But there's a unique message that goes with him. It simply says, he saw and believed. That's all it took. He didn't need further evidence. That was enough evidence. His love of Christ, he doesn't need a resurrection appearance. He just sees and believes. He has this simple faith that comes bubbling up. And that's based, again, on love and community that will show up in his influence on this gospel. And that's his experience. You know there's people like this that have this simple faith. Sometimes we need something a little bigger like Mary has. Or, because our grief and our rage are getting in the way, or we're going to need more little evidence to analyze and, keep putting the pieces together like Peter will need. But this disciple just gets to see and believe. Thanks be to God for that kind of simple witness that I know we've all known and seen in others. So finally, Peter comes, and again, he gets the tomb third, but he goes into the tomb, and you get kind of this idea that he kind of stands there and looks around even a little more carefully. And he sees the grave clothes, but he also notices separately the face cloth that is folded up and it's laid in a different place there. And so it's like he's collecting evidence, and he goes back after this. But there is a line there that applies to all of them, that they don't yet understand the teachings that Jesus must rise from the dead. Peter is going to need to keep getting evidence and keep learning. And there's part of us that says, isn't one resurrection appearance enough? That should have been enough. It was enough for these other people. But no. Is one Easter Sunday enough for us? I mean, we hear this story every year. You'd think we get it by now. But no, we have to have it. And Peter gets stuff over and over and over again. Multiple resurrection appearances, including like several different commissionings from Jesus where Jesus tells him, feed my sheep, and tells him, follow me. And then the book of Acts picks up with other things that happened to Peter. He gets to be there at the ascension when Jesus says, you're going to be my witnesses. And then at Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit comes and they're all filled and they're able to give messages, and Peter preaches this incredible sermon, who is just a simple fisherman, and people are saved left and right, and he starts healing people and preaching, and he gets to a point where he can just walk by people and his shadow falls on them and they're healed. And then he raises somebody from the dead. And finally, we come to the point in the book of Acts that you heard first today, where he's arrived at the home of the Roman centurion Cornelius, and which is not anywhere that Peter ever expected to be, even in all the things that's happening. And he's there because God sent him a dream and gave him a specific message and said, there's going to be some messengers who come and knock on your door, and you go with them to this Roman's house. And then he gets to Cornelius's house, and Cornelius says, by the way, I got a message from God that told me to send for you. So at this point, Peter says, listen to these words. He says, I am learning. He's still learning. I am learning. He says, I'm learning. And he goes back and he says, I'm learning all these things that from witnessing, that we're all sharing from the time of John the Baptist through Jesus's life and healing. And I actually even got to eat with Jesus after he was raised from the dead. And we all learned this from the prophets. And here's what I'm learning. That God shows no partiality amongst the people. That this message is for everyone. And the message is the forgiveness of sins. And here's Peter, totally different experience. I am learning, he says. I am learning. So we have this permission from these different disciples and witnesses and so many others that we have known through the years, and all the saints and the writings and the scriptures and our own experiences. We have this permission to say, who is this God? What do I see? What have I learned? What do I believe? Today we claim once again this good news of the resurrection. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.